Hello, hello. Predictably, the New York Times has doubled down on its Greatest Living American Songwriters list, which it issued earlier this month. There was predictably a backlash to the list, a lot of YouTube kind of foaming at the mouth, including one of my own videos, which you can watch on the channel. And they are sticking to their story. But what does that have to do with the Vietnam War and the decline of the American empire? And on a related note, comedian Kevin Hart, one of the most visible, high-profile comedians of our age, was recently roasted at a Netflix roast, and predictably, it is causing all sorts of consternation and pearl clutching on both Team Red and Team Blue. I am Sabby Reyes Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist. Welcome to the 40th Feedback Deaf live stream, a daily, 5 days a week conversation, sometimes 2 or even 3 times a day, about music, memory, meaning, and life. And by life, I mean comedy, parenting, sports, anxiety. Let's see what else. I always forget all the different topics. Lots of different things. Pretty much anything I want to talk about. But there's a sort of a stable of topics, with music being the primary horse, that maybe even the dead horse, that I am flogging almost incessantly on this channel, and I am happy to have you. Theme music. I just made that up. That's not our theme song. We actually have 3 of them. 2 that I've used. Or is it 3? And there's another one in progress. I'm not even sure which one is going to be the one, but I don't have it queued up. I would urge you, before I start, to hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons if you like what I'm laying down. You can also check out other content on the channel that is related to this. And most of all, comment, either during the live stream or otherwise. This is a monologue, but I love for it to become a dialogue. There are no stupid people, only stupid comments. And even those, if you roll with them enough, usually you can get the person to actually start engaging in good faith and realizing that you're not just somebody they're attacking. Okay, so I have a video on the New York Times 30 Greatest American Living Songwriters list that was published in the New York Times Magazine recently. And I have never in my life been a fan of the New York Times. I have had a very almost sickening sense or response to the tone of that newspaper since I was in middle school. Something about it just oozed, almost like a bad odor, or certainly a negative vibration has oozed with class blindness that I find really unappealing. And because they have been considered the paper of record for decades, the institutional authority around the New York Times I find really, really destructive, particularly when it comes to social issues that the editorial staff have thrown their weight behind presenting with a very specific slant. And like so many other arts and culture outlets, I mean, the New York Times is a newspaper, but they have an arts and culture wing. They've injected their sociopolitical bias into their discussions of music and film and literature and television and theater. And this is no more evident than in the not so much the list itself, but when the New York Times staff recently, the New York Times recently posted a YouTube short where the staff sat around and defended their choices. Actually, it was a longer video but there is a short version that I'm going to play for you. And they doubled down on their choices and gave context to why they chose certain songwriters, and then gave further context for what the definition of songwriting even is. And of course, they bumbled their way into this and made it completely like racially charged in a way that I find really irresponsible, destructive, but also just, it's not just those things. It is clumsy and bumbling in a way that would almost be comical if it weren't so what's the word, incompetent, and so completely out of touch with the very world that they are trying to define and communicate with, which is us, the audience, the people. So here is the short version of this video, and you'll get a taste for what I'm talking about, and then I'll get into my reactions. So here we go.
You know, now that it's out in the world, I think it's fair to say that you guys all stand by the list that you made. Is that fair to say?
I feel like I can spiritually stand by the list, but if I want to trouble the entire process, I don't think our task was making a list. I think our task was expanding and re-examining the notion of American songcraft. That, to me, was the root of all the arguments that we made in that room. To the extent that we disagreed with each other, or to the extent that we gave grace to each other, or to the extent that we agreed with each other, I feel like everybody in that room was willing to think expansively about what songwriting is. And songwriting is such a peculiar thing. It has so much baggage. It comes with attachment to certain communities, certain subgenres, and engaged fans who have an extremely fixed idea of what constitutes songcraft.
And what do you think that idea is? Like,
I think it's a heroic white man with a guitar struggling through his emotions, sitting in a room, no collaborators, no contact with the outside world, perhaps alcohol, perhaps drugs, accessing some kind of pure emotional truth and putting it in a rock, country, or otherwise roots affiliated genre. Folk, sure.
Singer-songwriter.
Yes. To me, as much as I enjoy some of that music, I do not mistake that for the totality of American song. I do not mistake that for the best examples of songcraft. And what I was grateful for in the room is that every person in their way, with their own personal frameworks that they came in the room with, was willing to say, it's not that. It's not that, but it's not only that.
Okay. My first feeling that I had after I watched that, aside from boiling over with anger, which I will try to contain here and not just say extravagantly outrageous things just for the sake of saying them, I will do my best to manage that. But now that I've had a day or so to process and sit on those feelings and why I was so utterly infuriated at everything you just watched, I do understand. My response is this. Even after I've had time to sit with this, I'll put it this way. I completely understand why despots, tyrants, dictators, people, or more broadly, people who wage revolutions, one of the first things they do is kill or imprison the intellectuals. They go after the intellectual class. And when I watch this, I can completely understand why. Now, that may seem like a very extreme, an extreme tone to bring into this conversation, which you might think, oh, it's essentially harmless. You know, these are just music critics sitting around a table talking. I'm obviously not advocating for anybody to go into the New York Times offices and do anything like that. I mean, that would be a woeful misunderstanding of where I'm coming from. But I get why people who have the wherewithal and the inner motivation, whatever we might say about it, or about how pathological it is, about how narcissistic and megalomaniacal they are, and how murderous they get, and the price they're willing to pay or extract from other people by hurting and murdering them, and the degradation they're willing to impose on their own soul. Whatever we might say about the problems with that motivation, I understand why people with that motivation would say, I'm looking out at the world, and the people who are telling us how we experience life are lying through their fucking teeth. And I am going to replace that with something else, with a new way of defining life. I am going to speak to you and for us in a much more aligned way than that. Now, obviously, tyrants, dictators, despotic leaders don't end up doing that. They don't fulfill the promise that they make. You know, they either terrorize people outright and seize control, or they pander to the appetites of people for something new. They can sense that people are tired. They're exhausted from being spoken for by people who have no idea who they are. Because I think to rise to power, you cannot just do it by force or by fear alone. You have to have people who see that you are so convinced, you have so much conviction that I'm going to be the person that installs something new, that remakes society, like tears it down and rebuilds it up. I'm going to want to be the one to have the nerve to do that. You have to be convinced. You have to have evangelical zeal and have a total sense of divine justification to do it, that you will stop at nothing. And if you have that, you will convince other people to fall in line behind you. It's like boats in the wake of your boat. You're the lead boat, and everybody else is, you know, that big V shape that a large boat creates, or any boat creates. All the other boats are falling in behind that. They feel contained within the momentum that you're generating as a would-be dictator, as a would-be leader. I mean, you think about these people: Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot. You can go on and on and on. And the makeup. Now, I have always had empathy for those people. I don't get into situations where I seek power. I don't have much of an appetite to lord my power over others. I don't do well in, like, you know, group hierarchical situations. I prefer to work alone. I prefer to do my own thing. I spend a lot of time alone. I do not do well in office type setups. I have zero interest in catering to someone else's authority over me. I do not give it to them. That's why I'm a contractor. It's like, I came here to do a job. You're hiring me to do a job. We're on the same plane. You're a fucking customer. You're not my boss. But I don't seek to have people under me either. So I don't so much empathize with the, like, ravenous appetite for power and for bloodshed. But the part I do empathize with is, well, look, the world isn't working around me. Somebody's got to change it. Somebody has to have the gumption to be the one to do it, to initiate the process. Because I think it's wrong to to just characterize these people as purely power hungry or greedy or driven by self-interest. I think in order to have the propulsion to go all the way with a mission like that, to wage a revolution, to kill people and reconfigure the political structure of society and set the terms, I think you cannot just be self-motivated. I don't know this. Obviously, Joseph Stalin didn't have a therapist. He didn't have a mental health counselor who took notes. He wasn't on YouTube. So we don't have this like record of like what made this guy tick. But I have to believe, this is just my hunch and just from observation, that self-interest alone isn't enough. You have to truly believe that you are doing right, even if it takes might. And when you start hearing the institutions around you become degraded by elitist yammering, as what we saw in that video, I think that is enough for somebody to perceive that and to spark them. It's almost like a match to gasoline that was waiting there, and for people to just completely want to wash out everyone that represents the institutional old guard. And I think the New York Times has forever, but especially now, is like dangerously flirting with its own obsolescence. With like the sense I get when I listen to these people, other than like it could have been a skit on Saturday Night Live, with just a tiny bit more exaggeration, that could have been a skit. Like that could have been The Onion if The Onion made fun of people like this, which they don't. They only go after people on the right or people who they perceive as being right-wing panderers. But other than that, other than the fact that it was like three Muppets and Admiral Akbar from Return of the Jedi, John Carmanica, Joe Cascarelli, and I forgot the sort of staff editor, the lady who introduced the clip. Her name will come up again in a bit, but they all sounded like Muppets to me, or Sesame Street characters. Well, you stood behind the list, okay? It's like, well, we wanted to ask about songwriting, and I don't think that that's the totality of the American songcraft. And the other guy's like, yeah, I like folk music. And then Admiral Akbar over there, Wesley Morris, and I only say that because of the way he's dressed. He's like, yeah, we have to take out those Star Destroyers. Other than that, what I get is like, man, these people do not understand that they are in a fortress that is being besieged, and like the angry mobs are going to sweep through the fortress and grab everybody they can and hang them out the fucking window, figuratively speaking. But the hubris that it takes to say the things that John Carmanica said, the unbelievable arrogance and presumption that we need to redefine songwriting because it mostly included white guys with guitars sitting in a room by themselves. I mean, I have a whole video about live stream I did about the populism, or I'm sorry, the rockist versus poptimist framing of music was totally wrong and like 15 years too late, and it was a re-interjection of racial tension into music and pop culture writ large that had mostly healed by the time Khalifa Sana wrote a piece about rockism, the rap against rockism in 2004, and of course the New York Times, like the usual suspects keep coming back, over and over. And this is echoing that. Like John Caramanica is still stuck in this idea that, well, our definitions of music and music discourse didn't include other populations that now need to be represented. And I've said this before to friends of mine and to, random people I've clashed with online who think they are progressive or left wing. And I've said, no, you're a colonizer. You have no trouble walking into places, into communities that you haven't bothered to understand. You only see them through the prism of your own vantage point, and you only see them as in a lower position than you, and you go in there to help them, and you would remake their entire world completely disregarding of their attitudes, their culture, what they want. You have presumed in your fucking unbelievable arrogance to know what is best for them. You are a colonizer. And listening to John Caramanica speak, I'm reminded of the US military in Vietnam. Ostensibly, at least what we were told, the motivation for that war was to help the South Vietnamese. Like we got involved in the Vietnamese Civil War with the communists in the north and put our weight behind the counter-revolutionary forces in the South who wanted to preserve, the status quo, basically. I mean, that's a gross oversimplification, but there was a book called Fire in the Lake that my history teacher in high school in 10th grade wanted us to read, assigned to us to read. And there's a real sense that the military brass just did not get the lay of the land culturally. They did not understand who these people were, what their motivations were. I'm talking about the Viet Cong. They didn't understand the society they were just muscling their way into. Maybe the intelligence community did. I don't know. I don't know enough about the finer points of that conflict. But it seems very believable to me, or I can completely see an empire like the USA at that stage in its military might and its economic, prosperity, thinking that it could just kind of exert its will, quote unquote, on behalf of people in a part of the world whose internal conflict we just didn't get. And there is a this is not quite the best parallel, but since I'm on the subject of Vietnam, there's a YouTuber who has an archive. He was a documentarian for most of his career. He filmed tons of interviews and has uploaded a bunch of them to YouTube. His name is David Hoffman. And he has an interview with a Vietnam veteran who actually was also in Ken Burns's Vietnam documentary series, which I thought was amazing, by the way. And big shout to Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross from Nine Inch Nails for doing the score to that. But this guy said, there was this perception of the Viet Cong that they were out terrorizing people, Vietnamese people in the countryside to recruit them. And he was like, they didn't have to do that. All they had to do was let one American military patrol go through a village, set it on fire, and they had all the recruits they would ever need. And I bring that up to say it's not the best parallel for what we're talking about here, but I bring that up to say that John Caramanica opening the doors on the definition of songwriting to try and include people, he's doing this on their behalf, who he has deemed have been excluded, is itself telegraphing of his own class bias. Because the people he's talking about don't need his help. I will give you two examples. One from the pre-rock and roll or pre-Brill building, Liebert and Stoller. I don't even know if those are good examples. But like people who sat in, or Tin Pan Alley, people who sat in offices with paper and wrote songs, like the traditional music industry songwriter of like the 40s and 50s, right before leading into the rock and roll era, the people who worked with like rock, pop, and country producers and would assign songs from these songwriters. Like producers would assign songs to artists, right? In this part, chapter of the music business, artists typically did not write their own material. There were songwriters. They were part of the chain of creativity and production. And oftentimes a producer would pair a songwriter or an artist with a song. These people literally had offices that they would sit in. You have stories of many musicians and artists from rock and country, like knocking on doors with a guitar, showing them their songs and wanting to start like a partnership with songwriters. So prior to that, though, going further back in the timeline, if you were to go to a Duke Ellington, Billy Strayhorn, Duke Ellington gets all the credit, but Billy Strayhorn has more recently been recognized as a collaborator with Duke Ellington, who was at least possibly even like halfway responsible for all of these amazing Duke Ellington tunes we have. If you were to go to Duke Ellington and be like, oh, you don't get enough credit as a quote unquote songwriter, would he have laughed at you and been like, I don't do that songwriting shit. I'm a composer. Excuse me, I'm a composer. I'm above songwriting. Would he have thought that songwriting compared to what he did was a less significant art form? Because he's seeing himself in this like much grander tradition, I'm guessing. They'd have been like, you don't need to include us. Your whole thing is on a lower plane than what we are. Fast forward past the rock and roll era to the 90s, where you have electronic producers who, in their rockist versus poptimist framing, supposedly electronic producers, people who make sample-based music, specifically hip-hop, but also like straight just electronic producers, who make beats and largely instrumental stuff. If you were to go to a band like The Orb, who do a lot of like sound collage kind of stuff and, psychedelic rave music that lasts for a long, long, long time. If you were to say to them, oh, you're not, we want to make sure you're included in the discussion as songwriters, would they have laughed at your ass and been like, dude, we're producers. We're like, we're sound construction workers. Like, we're architects of sound. Actually, they're architects and the construction workers at the same time. Right? We don't need your recognition. Like, songwriting is one of the modes music can take, and it is not confined to white guys with guitars. I don't know what hat John Carmonica is pulling this rabbit out of, because I don't know that anybody would have said that Otis Redding or Marvin Gaye or Smokey Robinson and on and on and on were not considered legitimate songwriters. Stevie Wonder, legitimate songwriters. These are giants of songwriting who had that stature. These people had their own prejudices and then projected them onto the rest of us, and have been swimming in their own filth ever since. And so in order to correct this problem which they invented, they walk like into these they walk with their shoulders up as these magnanimous liberators, much like the US military has been viewed as a liberator, quote unquote, of people. And they're saying, we want to liberate you from your exclusion, from our regard. Aren't we wonderful? Aren't we magnanimous? Aren't we noble? No, you're colonizers. You're colonizers. Steeped in your own class bias, blinded, walking blindfolded with like what is that stuff called? Plaster of Paris. We used to use it in our class, where you'd wet it up and it looks like mummy strips, and then you wrap it around things and then it solidifies. That is what they're walking around with, all four of these people around their eyes, liberating others from the dominance of the white guy with the guitar, and making music open to marginalized groups. These are colonizers. This is the way colonizers think. This is the way empires think, and ultimately fail. They collapse under the weight of their own, they get drunk on their own success and can't read the pulse of what's actually going on, because they've bought into their own myth so much that they detach from reality and can no longer manage all these satellite states under their control. This is exactly what is happening with the New York Times, which does not, like, it has not registered just how irrelevant their grip on the public is and how weak it has become. And they just keep saying things like this. I don't know if it's intentional or just so lacking in self-awareness that it just engenders more and more and more resentment and even hatred. And I completely understand why that is, because if you put these musical comments in the context of the social issues they have been similarly blinkered and blinded on, then it's like, wow, you people really do think you know what's best for everyone. Your white liberal savior complex is raging just as bad as any megalomaniacal king or tyrant or emperor that there ever was. After gay marriage became enshrined into law, was like legally officially recognized in the United States, two different gay people on separate occasions told me or voiced their reservations about this. One of them was more moderate and eventually came around to it, but the other one was very staunch and said, I never wanted to be recognized by your outdated institution. All you're doing is turning us into you and bringing us into a more socially sanctioned way of living. And I think she posted this on Facebook, and I think she posted it with like, fuck you. And she was angry at this decision. That it yes, conferred this right on gay people that they had been excluded from, but it also, to paraphrase what she was saying, I don't have the post in front of me, this was years ago, obviously, at this point, but what she was saying was, it also has this literally normalizing effect that now it's going to encourage gay people to follow the norms that had applied to straight people the whole time, the heteronormative lifestyle. And that's a lot of what happened. And then the more moderate person I talked to, he was actually talking to me about this at a bar. And he said, well, you know, I personally would have pushed for civil unions, because for me, it was like, why would I want to be included in a social institution that had never included us to begin with? Why would I want to be recognized by a religious and social construct that had for years, in its very definitions, said, you can't be a part of this? He said to me something similar, to, you know, and he was a little more nuanced than what my other friend said, but he said, I had always thought we were in a better position to be excluded from marriage because it gave us a vantage point to look at this social norm that you were just expected to follow. It gave us a, you know, an outside view of it, and I thought we were better off. Now, he eventually did say, you know, I support the, you know, I support the rights of people to get married. It's great to have the choice, but I thought it was interesting that that was his first like gut reaction, and that he was concerned enough to tell me about it over a beer. And he was like, you know, I thought we had the best of both worlds with civil unions. We could have all the same rights, tax status, and all that, but without the baggage. And similarly here, the parallel with what John Caramanica is saying is he's bestowing this gift onto people who I don't think, number one, cared about being excluded from it, and two, don't want it. And the New York Times, they do this all the time. They impose a way of looking at an issue, or just art, music, which I think is even more cruel, actually, because I can see why people have stakes in propagandizing behind social issues. When you employ art and force that into the realm of art, that to me is a personal violation of the individual. That's like going into a church or some other religious building like a mosque or something and just playing music really fucking loud to drown out what's actually happening in that space, the reverence that the person is, the adherent is feeling. And that's what they're doing here. The New York Times, like, imposing something from the top. We are at the levers of culture and your understanding of what you're going out to the store to buy or listening to on your phone or whatever. This is colonialism. This is what empires do to their own populations. They keep them subjugated with mythology, with the invention of narrative, with the top-down framing so that you feel like you're part of it, but you're not. And it's really, really insidious, and I would say extremely destructive. This is not just an aesthetic quibble that I have, and I'm like, oh, the New York Times, like, they're so stupid because they didn't include so-and-so and so-and-so, and I think they should have. That's not what I'm talking about. I could give a fuck who they included, who I like. I couldn't care less. I'm physically incapable of caring less. If you, as somebody whose musical perspective I admire, didn't include certain people, I wouldn't try to persuade you otherwise. I'd go, oh wow, well those are the people you think are the greats. Okay, that's no bearing on what I feel. If you're a friend of mine and we've been chopping it up and then we start butting heads a little bit, that's a little different. So that's more like friendly sparring. I might make fun of your choices then, but if you're anybody who I have any sense of decorum with, and you're just talking to me about who you would put on that list, I wouldn't argue with you. I don't care. And actually, I'll take that back. I do care if you are a thoughtful listener who is impassioned about the people you love and why you would make a case. But I think this entire uh, device of who's the greatest is thoroughly uninteresting to me. If it's just like, oh, here are people who I admire, who I think are great, I'm all ears. You could talk to me till you're blue in the face. I will not say much, believe it or not, to respond. I am curious about what you are seeing and hearing. When you start attaching that to institutional claims on the truth, even as they say out of the other side of their mouth, oh, it's all subjective. It's all subjective, right? Yeah, no, yeah, it's all subjective, but you are attaching the label greatest to it. So you're not being subjective at that point. Because if you were being subjective, you just say, here's a bunch of songwriters we felt like recognizing, and here's why. That's all. And then, great. Knock yourselves out. Do it. I would even check that out myself. But no, you're attaching the label, the greatest. And we all got together and deemed these people, and we had debates, and we engraved it on the holy scroll and unfurled it before the world in the temple of truth. They don't say things like that, but that's what they are trying to do. And you can say, oh, Sam, you're taking it too seriously. They just wanted to like drop a bunch of stuff in there, and they intentionally wanted people to talk about it because they want clicks. Yeah. And Lindsay Zolands, who is on the New York Times staff, she's one of the contributors, admitted as much on WNYC. I played a clip from that. I think I played a clip from that on a previous live stream. But that's not all they're doing. They know all too well they are the paper of record. They know what the critic used to mean in society. And man, they are not letting that go. Now, I want to play you something. I want to play you Rick Beato's response to this video. I did a video recently where I talked about how I feel bad sometimes when I go after specific public figures or content creators or speakers or essayists or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, if that was Mike Tyson, would I be speaking as, would I be, I did a video where I complained and took to task Rick Beato for interrupting so much. And Rick Beato is from the city I live in. He's from Rochester, New York, which is my adoptive home since I was 17 years old. And, I've been here longer than like the time I grew up in New York. Now I've been here twice as long as that. So this is home. He's from here. And I said in the video, we take his success very seriously here. We are personally very proud. Like there's a sense of civic pride in knowing this guy is just like tearing it up on the internet. And he's one of us. I mean, he's one of us more than I'm one of us. He was born and raised here, or he at least grew up here. But I then said, look, he would be getting more from his interviews if he didn't just stomp all over the interviewer and interrupt them every 5 seconds and derail their train of thought. And I thought about that before posting it. It's like, is this going to be seen as, number one, is it just rude? Two, is it going to be seen as chasing clout? Especially since I had approached Rick's producer to help them book interview guests. And then are they going to take it as me swiping at them because I was mad about that never got off the ground? No, that's not it at all. I actually felt freer. I was like, well, good thing we didn't start a working relationship, because now I can just say how I feel without filtering it. But I still was like, well, was my tone too biting? Is that really the way to go about it? And it's like, that's how I feel. I stand behind everything I said. I absolutely think he interrupts way too much, and I think he would have an even better presentation and achieve what he is trying to achieve if he didn't do that, right? But I stand behind what I said. The video is still up on my channel. Um, uh, and that's how I would be speaking to a friend if I were just talking to a friend. Like, oh my God, I'm like, Jesus Christ, like he interrupts too fucking much. But I've always felt a little bit like, let's try to rein that in a little bit. Well, I'll give you an example of Rick. Rick's response to John Caramanica. I saw that and I felt immediately better about my video on Rick, my response to Rick, after I saw this. So let's see. Let me try and cue this up, because Rick was even more, took his gloves totally off when he responded to John Caramanica. So this is this is I'm going to make this bigger. Boop, 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 boop. Wait. So that is the thumbnail for Rick Beato's video. Watch this New York Times music critic, in quotes, embarrass himself again, in all caps. And then the thumbnail says, "This fucking guy," with asterisks on it. So I thought that was funny. But let's reset. Let's reset the size here, and let's actually watch the video, because I think it's really, really, really instructive on everything that I'm talking about and everything that I'm responding to. Rick also responded on the same. He's not going as far as like bringing in Pol Pot and talking about bloody revolutions and hanging people in the street. He's not going that far. But in terms of where this message is coming from, where these messages are being transmitted, and the bias and the class bias that shapes them, Rick is right there on the pulse. I should also say this before I forget and before I start this video. I've talked a lot about my opposition to the whole idea of music critics and what their goal is in judging art. But it's never occurred to me fully, it's never crystallized until today, that music critics are given a platform. There's almost a patronage from an institution or an outlet, like a publisher, like a Rolling Stone or a New York Times. Music critics, for a time there, were employed. You could be a well-paid staff writer for a magazine or newspaper and really live okay off of that job. And I've really taken the whole idea of music criticism to task for a long time, and it's one of the drums I bang on almost every day on this channel. But the employer, like the people with money and access to publishing who are behind them, I think it's more important to look at their intentions, because it's like, hey, if there's a job where I can talk about music, sure, I'll take it. But it's those outlets, those publications, those institutions that had cultural cachet off of the backs of their staff of music critics, and even more so off of the backs of artists, it's those people, those elements who let their sociopolitical agenda guide the conversation among the critics. So in a lot of ways, critics they can be working class, everyday people who just buy into a sense of like how to look at the world. They buy into a perspective that would not have typically been afforded to their social class by the publishers, because it's in the interest of the publishers to let these people think, oh yeah, they're in the same room as us, but really we're not. We're not. We're not in the same room as them. And it's really important for critics to not allow themselves to be used as useful instruments. And I say useful instruments, not useful idiots. I mean, you can swap them if you want. Sometimes that is what I think of what they do. But typically, for everything that I say about music critics, they are very, very, very thoughtful. They are trying to do something that they think is noble and edifying to the public. They think that stopping to take a pause to contemplate music will benefit all of us if we meet them where they're at. And I do think that is a benign intention. But then you hitch their raft to Rolling Stone or the New York Times and the messages those outlets are driving to shape society, and then we get a different equation. We get music critics and music being used as a kind of fulcrum or springboard to shape other opinions and attitudes. I have often talked about music criticism as the manufacture of consensus, which is obviously a riff on Noam Chomsky's phrase, the manufacture of consent, or manufacturing consent for warfare, which is what governments do when they propagandize a war effort using the media as their useful tools. Noam Chomsky referred to the New York Times as the lapdogs of the emperor in the documentary Manufacturing Consent. He didn't come up with that term by himself. There's somebody else. He and one other person whose name escapes me now came up with that term. But they manufacture consent. So the public consents to a war because of the story you attach to that war, and it makes it seem justifiable to the public. With music, what I have offered for a long time is that there is no consensus around music. Yeah, Thriller, I have a whole video on Michael Jackson also that you can watch on the channel. Thriller has sold, oodles and oodles and oodles and oodles, tens of millions of albums. It's one of the most popular albums ever released. If not, it has at times been the most highest selling album ever. It's like flip-flops back and forth between that and the Eagles' greatest hits. And now, of course, we measure things differently because of streaming. But, you can say, well, that's, there's an objective truth. Thriller is good. Well, I actually prefer Michael Jackson's first solo album, Off the Wall, to Thriller almost entirely, almost in every regard. Right? So would you say that it is objectively true that Thriller is quote unquote better? That to me, that's an idiotic conversation to even walk into. Who cares? There is no objective truth about art. Lou Reed's Metal Machine music was an intentionally abrasive, non-musical, like I think it's a double album of just sheer noise that Lou Reed made on purpose to be unlistenable. A friend of mine who's a musician, friend Gary, who was actually once with the guy, the moderate guy who was talking to me about his reservations about gay marriage, but that's just an incidental side note, my friend Gary said, I guarantee you there's some German kid out there who puts that album on and thinks it's the greatest thing ever made, who thinks it's a total masterpiece. And my friend Gary's right. I mean, I haven't met this German kid, but there's no way people don't love that music. You can try your best to make something awful, and you'll still find somebody who goes, "Oh my God, this is music to my ears." Because, as another dear friend of mine once said, one person's something is another person's garbage dumpster or something. One person's dumpster, I don't even remember the exact. It's like one person's ceiling is another person's floor. Is the cliche, common expression. And this is absolutely true. We all know this. So why do we need to generate this sense that we have all collectively arrived at this agreed upon way of cataloging certain music and defining it by these terms that, yeah, we can all say this is the greatest, blah, 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 blah. We can all say this. Like music criticism, the very premise is to manufacture this sense in the reader or the viewer that you are in line with or being steered towards what the public, what we have all collectively decided. It's not we all nothing. It's a group of a small, like, clique or cabal of people. And that's what I want to get to with the Rick Beato response to this, because he addresses this as well.
Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. Now, I don't usually make videos back to back on the same topic, but one of my buddies sent me this video of 3 of the critics and the editor from that New York Times Top 30 Living American Songwriters article that came out a few days ago. This is a podcast they did called the Cannonball Podcast with Wesley Morris. The guy that you're going to hear speak first is Wesley Morris. I want to play you a few clips of this podcast and talk about who these people are and what their background is. I think this is instructive to kind of get a vibe of what the people that write for the New York Times, what the music critics that write for the New York Times are like. So this is Wesley.
First thing I've ever been asked to do, like what am I supposed to do?
Like
when Bonnie Raitt submits her list of the greatest songwriters, not obey her
I get on my
wishes,
kids about that.
But
Come on,
the
Rick, let him talk.
assignment was to take all those ballots and then use our own critical
He's
judgment
going to introduce
nail
the
down a
people
list of 30.
here.
So I, along with the reporter Joe Coscarelli, my fellow critics Danielle Smith, Jody Rosen, John Caramanica, and Lindsay Zolads, we all hung out in a room, sequestered, and spent days talking it, shouting it, singing it all out. Last week, we published the list, the 30 greatest living American songwriters. And look, it went out into the world. Y'all had feelings. About 6,000 comments have come in so far, mostly asking,
Is that a lot?
how could you possibly leave out so-and-so? Well, look, I mean, we only had 30 spots.
I have a lot
to
of
play
comments,
with,
but they didn't
we
say
also
that.
made those choices for a reason. So I'm inviting 2 of the folks who were in the room with me making those decisions, John Caramanica and Joe Coscarelli, the hosts of the podcast, and the editor of the project, Sasha Weiss, friend of the show, to talk about the impossible task we faced.
Okay, so check this guy, John Caramanica, out as he explains what a songwriter isn't to him.
I feel like everybody in that room was willing to think expansively about what songwriting is. And songwriting is such a peculiar thing. It has so much baggage. It comes with attachment to certain communities, certain subgenres. And
Songwriting has baggage,
engaged
okay?
fans, which I know we'll talk about later, who have an extremely fixed idea of what constitutes songcraft.
And what do you think that idea is? Like,
I think it's a heroic white man with a guitar struggling through his emotions, sitting in a room, no collaborators, no contact with the outside world, perhaps alcohol, perhaps drugs, accessing some kind of pure emotional truth and putting it in a rock, country, or otherwise roots affiliated
Folk.
genre. Folk, sure.
Singer-songwriter.
Yes. to me, as much as I enjoy some of that music, I do
Some of
not
that
mistake
music.
that for the totality of American song. I do not mistake that for the best examples
Mhm.
of songcraft.
So
And what I'm
songwriting
grateful for in the room
is not
that
the best
every
example of
person in their
songwriting.
way-
Who are these people that were part of this article? So that guy talking there, John Caramanica, he's 50 years old. He went to Harvard University. He has a BA in English, not in music. He contributed to this thing, not only as a judge, but he actually wrote some of the bios of the people that were selected. Lionel Richie, Young Thug, Romeo Santos, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, and Bad Bunny. Those were his contributions to it. The other guy with the beard, that's Joe Coscarelli. Unfortunately, these guys are actually Italian, seems like, so I apologize for them. He's 37. He went to NYU. He has a BA in journalism. Okay, writes for the New York Times. He contributed the Taylor Swift, Outkast, and The Dream portions of it. And then you have Jody Rosen. He contributed Nile Rodgers, Jay-Z, Paul Simon, Missy Elliott, Josh Osborne, Brandy Clark, Shane McAnally, Stephen Merritt, Willie Nelson, Bob Dylan. He has a BA in American Studies from Yale University. Okay, so we have Yale, we have Harvard. Wesley, who's hosting this, he's 50 years old. He has a BA in film studies from Yale University. And Sasha Weiss, who was the deputy editor of the New York Times, who's in the video here, she has her degree from Princeton University. So mostly Ivy League people. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I don't see any music degrees in here from these music critics. Not that you need to have a degree in music to be a music critic, but maybe it would help a little bit if you're talking about, I don't know, melody, rhythm, song structure. Maybe it'd be helpful if you're talking about production, know something about music. A lot of these people, as you can see, have their degrees in literature and American studies.
So now this is an interesting point because I want to focus on what he's saying, that these are educated, college educated, often Ivy League products, and the worldview from that segment of society absolutely filters down into institutions. Now, I should confess, I went to an exclusive Manhattan private school from 4th grade through my senior year of high school. But it was always very evident to me, and not through any discomforts or being treated badly. I was not treated badly at all by my classmates for the most part. I found the overwhelming majority of my mostly white, wealthy classmates were very accepting, even more accepting of me than the people I grew up around in my neighborhood or even in my own family. So I have no bone to pick with people from that world, except when they don't realize there is a rest of the world that they don't know and they can't relate to. And I have nothing against higher education, but it's no accident, it's not a coincidence that people who've been through that educational system at those academic institutions, Yale, Harvard, just have this inherent sense that they can tell us our own stories. And once Rick Beato put that into context, I was like, whoa, okay, this is why I'm having such a visceral, even hateful response towards this. It's not that you're from that background, because I got to quote Miles Davis here. When he was interviewed on 60 Minutes, oh man, I wish I had the clip. I can cue it up, but I don't want to derail the train of thought. He was interviewed on 60 Minutes, and the interviewer goes, "Do black musicians suffer more?" And he goes, and he like scrunches his face like somebody just gave him like a spoonful of a tablespoon of like lemon juice, like bitter. And he's like, and then he laughs. And he's like, no, 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 no. I won't do it. He goes, I had a teacher at Juilliard who talked about the Black experience and how, it's more, that's what informs the blues. And he goes, and I told her, he said, look, my dad was rich. My mom is beautiful. And I can still play the blues. In other words, don't fucking patronize me. Don't tell me what I am, is what he was saying. Don't assume that you know what makes this music. And he goes, I never suffered. He says that to the interviewer. Maybe I'll cue that up in a second and play it because it's super entertaining watching Miles, like, his facial expressions respond. There's a lot of musicians. The fucking Rolling Stones were rich kids. Okay? A lot of musicians from the upper class whose music I love and who I think is very real and authentic. But when people from that sphere then take the wheel and they're like, no, we're going to be the faucet. We're going to be the aperture, the lens that closes and opens and allows, we decide what light gets in, where the light shines. That bothers me. It also bothers me just as much in the other direction. It bothered me to no end that a lot of people I grew up around thought that their world was the world. And you see this like endemic in hip hop. It's just like going out, bumbling out into the rest of America thinking that it can relate to what you're saying. No, they were proven right in a sense because tons of white kids gobbled it up. But to not realize, hey, there's more to this than what I know is really a problem. I have a real problem with it whenever anybody does that and whenever they seize the conversation, which we're going to get to that with Kevin Hart in a little bit. That'll be the flip, the sort of inverse mirror image kind of this conversation. But when Rick Beato discloses where these people are from, like it's not just socioeconomically, because you can go to Harvard and not be rich, but it's the mentality, it's what you're steeped in. Now, where I will slightly diverge, but sort of with one foot in agreement, is where he talks about, well, what about music degrees? Look, I'm not formally trained in music at all. I took clarinet in like 5th grade and didn't stick with it. And could not tell you on a guitar what a G chord is or what it even sounds like. But I make music and I've recorded and produced music. And to me, that is the thing. That's where I would draw the line, where Rick is saying, you got to know something about music. I feel like you have to have experienced the creation of it to be able to communicate about its inner workings, even though I cannot put formal musicological terms on it. I can discourse with people about rhythm, harmony, structure, pacing, dynamics, all those things because I've done them and because I live them in the present. I live those things. And, I forgot to mention, speaking of that, there's music I make that you could describe as songwriting, quote unquote, that has sort of the kernel or a core of like some idea that you would refer to as a song, like at its heart. But a lot of the music I make is me walking around recording random sounds and turning that into something. It has no development. It doesn't go from a verse to a chorus. It doesn't necessarily build. I don't care if you include that type of music. It's like ambient music, or it is ambient music. Go to any ambient artist. Do they care if you consider them songwriters. No, they don't. They'll laugh at you. They're perfectly happy on their patch of land musically. They might appreciate the shit out of songwriters like I do. They might tell you who their favorite songwriters are, but they don't need to be included in your party. They don't need your patronage or recognition. They recognize they are making their own type of art and are perfectly contented doing that. So, look, I hope the people in this video and anybody who has a plum gig expounding on the arts in this way, who deems themselves as qualified to be the frame for the rest of us, I hope these people are saving their paychecks, because when the castle gets stormed, you may find that you're not just out on your ass without a livelihood. You may find that you're being sent to some gulag somewhere. And while I'm not advocating it, I would understand why you ended up that way. If you want to communicate with the public, you have a right, or I'm sorry, you have a responsibility to try to be in tune with the people you're talking to. Where Rick would say you have to know music, I'd say know your fucking audience before you speak for the rest of us, before you speak for America. You don't have the first clue what America is. And oh, by the way, your grip on what that is, the armor that you hide behind, is crumbling and falling apart by the minute. And soon you won't have that institutional protection to hide behind. And all these years that people have been building up, all of that animosity towards your sense of authority, you will be shocked at how that boils over into anger, and people have a right to be angry. I'm not saying people should go pull a Charlie Hebdo on the New York Times office. God, of course not. God forbid. I'm saying stop drinking the Kool-Aid of your own bias, because it's making you sick. It's making you blind. And the longer you don't consider that there's a whole other way or ways to look at the world you've built, the world that you have hallucinated, you're going to be in trouble when there's no place for you. We don't need to kill intellectuals anymore for them to completely die off when the paradigm changes on them. When society moves on from where you're standing, you will be obsolete. So that's what I would say. Save those fucking checks, because you might need them sooner than you think. All right, moving on to the Kevin Hart roast. I want to play you I want to, well, let me just let Joe Budden, podcaster, former rapper, take it from here and introduce the subject.
All right, who had a chance to see the Kevin Hart roast?
I did. I watched it.
The Kevin Hart roast was live on Netflix. Shout out to Netflix. Yeah.
Stop catcalling.
Mini skirt.
Hey, Natty.
Mini skirts everywhere.
Hey, Natty.
Netflix. Yeah, the Kevin Hart roast was live on Netflix. If you tuned in, you were able to rewind it and start it from scratch. But I caught the entire thing. Interested to hear thoughts before I get. Yeah, actually, no. Some people out there are against bringing white people to the cookout. Not mad at y'all.
I'm one of them.
You against bringing white people to the cookout?
Yes.
So, go ahead. So let's put those people to the side for a second. Some people ain't mad at white people coming to the cookout, but one harsh reality we got to deal with is some black people don't have good +1 credit with you.
Yes.
So you could bring the wrong white person to the cookout. Mm-hmm. That's how I feel about Kill Tony being invited to this event.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about.
He's talking about comedian Tony Hinchcliffe, who is known as a Trump supporter. He's known as a MAGA comedian who hosts the show Kill Tony, where amateur comedians get on stage in front of a live audience, a crowd in a comedy venue, but Tony and a bunch of professional comedians are on the stage and they roast the comedian. Now, a lot of times they'll roast each other, and the amateur comedian will clap back at Tony, and then the professional comedians will roast Tony himself. That's why it's called Kill Tony. So Tony Hinchcliffe told a joke, which I'll try to find it. Actually, I should have queued it up. But told a joke about George Floyd at this Kevin Hart roast. If you don't know what a roast is, it is a formal gathering of comedians and Hollywood, actors, entertainers of all stripes. In the crowd, Lizzo was at this roast, The Rock was at this roast, and they are all invited to take turns saying really, really harsh, like making fun of, but really, really harsh shit to the subject, the butt of the roast. So the Kevin Hart roast, everybody's just dunking on Kevin Hart, like telling jokes at his expense. And then, interestingly enough, they have a group of high-profile people, some of whom participate in the roast, who are sitting up front so that comedians can make fun of them too, because you don't want to make fun of the same person for like 3 hours. So this just becomes like a mudslinging fest, and it's typically done in a good-natured way, but the jokes it's understood they're meant to go as far and as like go for the jugular as you can. Like if the person being roasted, if one of their kids died or their spouse had a miscarriage, like comedians will go in on that, like piranhas or sharks sensing blood. Now, there are some parameters. The object of the roast has the opportunity to veto anything that or set certain restrictions and be like, no, these things are what's the word I'm looking for? These things are a no-fly zone. Don't talk about this, don't talk about this, don't talk about this. So they ultimately sign off on everything that you hear in one of these roasts, just about, unless a comedian goes rogue. So superstar former NFL quarterback Tom Brady, Netflix did a Tom Brady roast last year, and one of the comedians did tell a joke about something he had asked him not to, about the owner of the New England Patriots, and Brady pulled him aside, and it looked tense for a moment, like, yo, I told you not to do that. So that didn't happen here with the Kevin Hart roast, and predictably, like I said at the top, the internet is buzzing with responses, with people saying the Kevin Hart roast went too far. Now, what's interesting about this is that people on the right and the left are both saying the same thing, but about different jokes, obviously. So I'm going to let Joe Budden continue here and talk about his mixed feelings about the roast.
Tony Hinchcliffe, whatever his name is, Kill Tony. And it hurts because he's funny. He's a funny racist.
He had a funny set, but I don't.
He's funny.
Yeah.
That's the thing that gets you caught between a rock and a hard place. He is funny, but he's a racist piece of shit. And when it's a Joe Rogan event or a Tom Brady roast or a white person roast, I have no problem because I know how a lot of y'all really feel about us. So if that's where y'all want to get y'all shit off, go right ahead. That's y'all space. At a black event with black excellence, such as Kevin Hart, why the fuck do I need to see Kill Tony? I don't get it. I don't get it.
Why is this a black event?
Well, it's because they're honoring Kevin Hart.
That's a good point. It's not a black event though. That's what I immediately.
An
I'm
event
like,
for black people. An event honoring a black person.
Okay.
I do think that's an important distinction, though.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
So
It is very-
that was a good
very.
point.
Yeah, and I think Kev's comedy world is more complex than that.
True.
You know, I think he celebrates black comedians. His whole crew, Plastic Cup Boys, shout out to them, are great, all black comedians.
Shout out to Naeem, who we had up here.
Absolutely.
Shout out to Spank and the
Spank,
guys.
my guy.
You know how we feel about the guys. We love the guys.
But he also rocks with white comedians. He's a comedy legend, so he's in the mix with all those people. And also, there's a roast culture, especially at Comedy Central and at Netflix, that you're gonna see the Nikki Glazers, you're gonna see the Jeff Rosses, you're gonna see those people. So
Jeff Ross killed.
He did.
Jeff Ross killed.
I think he's an executive producer on the show too. So.
Should be.
Yeah,
He should be.
And at every roast, he should be.
he's a roast guy.
He's a roast master.
He kills.
But like you said, a couple of them picks, I was like, I don't know. And then some of it wasn't who was telling the joke, it was also who was writing the joke. Because, you know, some of the non-comedian celebrities that's up there, there's writers that are making these jokes for them. And it was like some of them it's like they made extra effort to make the joke as wild and cringy as possible. And sometimes it worked. And to me, sometimes a couple of times it did.
A lot of times it didn't.
It was
The Kill Tony George Floyd joke
horrible.
Was horrible. And I felt like Kev smiling during it was horrible, even if that's him with his game face on.
Yeah.
He has to keep that.
I'm about to say, what do you do in that moment?
He has to.
Like I'm watching him get killed for that.
He has to keep the game.
But in that moment, and
there's nothing you can do in the moment.
Right.
The action, Oh, please.
What can you do? What?
Yeah,
Kick him
he's
off?
right. Yeah,
that's what you do.
You can make it look like you're not okay with that joke. The
Right.
same way if you're in the shtick, you made it look like that when The Rock was talking about screwing your wife as a bit. It was a very uncomfortable bit. I thought that bit was cringy too,
Yeah, it was.
but I didn't put it on The Rock because he didn't write that.
The nipple
Tony
thing, too,
and the
was-
George Floyd shit. Actually, before he said the George Floyd shit, I was tight because they said Tony looks like, this was during somebody else's roast. I forgot. Maybe it was Pete. I don't remember. Tony looks like at the slave master that makes his slaves do musicals. That's funny. Everybody laughed. And he felt the need to get up and act that out and turn around to where all the black people were sitting line behind him and do the musical.
Conduct the shit.
Somebody needs to slap the shit out of him. That's not okay while we honor the black person. It's not okay. I get it. It's comedy. We can say what we want. Oh, it's edgy. It's a roast. Everybody got to get him the fuck out of here. No, do that shit in what's that part of Texas?
Yeah.
Austin. Do that shit in Austin at Joe Rogan's Comedy Club. Not here, not now. Get the fuck out of here. And he's funny.
No, he's fun. He is fun.
I just
But some
one battle after another Lizzo joke was very funny.
the who?
One battle after another Lizzo, the stairs. That shit was funny.
That shit was fun.
That was funny.
Yeah, he said shout out to Regina Bell. Regina
No, he
Bell.
said Lizzo.
Not
Regina Hall.
Regina Bell. I am an old. He said, shout out to Regina Hall for winning the award for one battle after another. That's how Lizzo feels when she looks at the stairs.
That was
Hilarious.
No, that shit was funny. Bro, I
thought all of the jokes, I'm sorry, Ish. I thought all of the jokes about Cheryl,
her husband.
I love those.
Not me.
Yo,
Yeah.
I love those.
me.
I loved every joke about Cheryl's husband committing suicide.
I had to look up to see when it happened.
It's been like 30 years.
And then once I saw that it was in 1990, I'm like, all right. And Shane Gillis, who killed as the host,
I didn't like him as a
kept
host.
saying, I liked him as the host.
I love
but he
Shane
kept
Gillis.
saying, yo, I spoke to her.
No, see, I think that matters. I think
Like,
if
I
you
talked
spoke
to
to the
these people.
person,
Okay, so the reason I'm letting this play so long, and I have a bunch of other videos queued up too, is because I think all of this context is important. Because obviously these events are put on by Netflix. You know, these two roasts, the Kevin Hart and the Tom Brady one. Netflix has subscribers across political persuasions. I think a lot of these corporations often play both sides, like they want their hand in both cookie jars. They want to be seen as falling in line with and acquiescing to the demands of whatever socio-political regime holds cultural power, while at the same time wanting to appeal to as large of an audience as they can. And if they can play to both sides of the aisle, they absolutely will do that. And inevitably, these responses devolve into, well, it's free speech. We all have free speech. And why are comedians upset? You see D.L. Hughley has talked about how he's very disapproving of what Tony Hinchcliffe said at the roast. I think I have audio of it queued up here somewhere that you'll be able to hear. But he talked about George Floyd looking up at the roasts, or saying like he'd be laughing so hard he'd be saying, "I can't breathe," and it didn't go over well in the room. People were like, "Oh, and Hinchcliffe seemed to revel in that discomfort. And like I said, these conversations typically spin into this place where comedians start complaining that other comedians are complaining. Like, how can you be a comedian and complain about what we can say and what we can't? And there was quite a bit of that this time, but I also thought there was really thoughtful commentary that was like, well, we don't know where that line is typically. And it wasn't strictly like, oh, fuck you, you can't take a joke, you pussy kind of thing, or you hypocrite. It wasn't like that. It was more nuanced, more reserved, more considered. And I really appreciated that. And I want to share some of those clips with you because to me, one of the questions I have is, why were politics injected into this at all? Why did Tony Hinchcliffe or the writers feel the need to bring George Floyd up at all, other than to tweak the audience? I mean, Kevin Hart attended George Floyd's memorial, but he's not a political comedian. If you were roasting D.L. Hughley, then that would make more sense. Because roasts used to be, when this started with Dean Martin, was the first time, as I understand it, this was done decades ago. And it was his circle of people he knew, he was associates with, he was friends with, entertainers who roasted him. Now they invite strangers, basically. There were people who had relationships with Kevin Hart, long-standing relationships in comedy or in his circle. There were there, and several of them roasted him. But Tony Hinchcliffe almost being parachuted in to tell a joke about George Floyd that is going to make the crowd, I mean, talk about not reading the fucking room. It's going to make the crowd uncomfortable. That's going to absolutely be guaranteed to generate, lots of online noise. It's like, what's behind that? And then you had Pete Davidson, who then makes a joke at Tony Hinchcliffe's expense, comparing him to a child molester and et cetera, et cetera. But then he brings Charlie Kirk, the now deceased right-wing, media icon, MAGA icon, who went around college campuses debating people, students. He brought Charlie Kirk into it. So Charlie Kirk sympathizers, they are triggered and clutching their pearls. And it's like, wait, hold it. What does any of that have to do with Kevin Hart? And why is comedy being used? I guess I was trying to look for a better word for, why is comedy serving as the vehicle for public agitation to generate an outcry, a divisive outcry, or two parallel outcries? Why is that even in the picture? It's out of context at a roast of Kevin Hart. I mean, people talked about him being short. They talked about his daughter, like group sex with a bunch of men, like running trains on his daughter. I mean, this went like to some really like to some places that you wouldn't even see at a comedy club, because it would be viewed as, whoa, that's extreme. And what's interesting is if you go to a comedy club, everybody knows this, you might get roasted by the comedian on stage, especially if you're towards the front. A lot of comedians, their stock in trade, their bread and butter is what's called crowd work, where all they do is look around at the crowd and start picking people out and asking them questions, and their entire set flows from that. And they'll say really harsh things, putting people on the spot, or really uncomfortable things. But the difference there is they have the room on their side. There's a sense that if you're not that person, you're either with the comedian or you're sharing with the rest of the crowd the sense of like, oh, that's cringy. I can't believe they just said that, kind of a thing. At a roast, I wonder about the personality it takes to say something in a room that you know is going to like piss people off so much, and just be able to just like push past that. And you can't legislate this. This is part and parcel of what comedy is. Are comedians part psychopath? I don't know. I'm not even asking that as a serious question, but is there something in comedians that for whatever reason enables them to be able to push past these social niceties and the reservations, the things that keep us hesitating from pushing those social boundaries? Clearly they have something. And is it pathological? Is there something broken in them that enables them to do that? And even watching a roast, for the audience, compare watching a roast and all the uncomfortable moments to watching just a regular comedy set. A regular comedy set, even if the comedian's doing crowd work the whole time, the whole night, is not nearly as like vicious as a roast. And I thought that I'll go to Godfrey, who's a fellow comedian. I will let him give his thoughts on the roast.
Okay, people have been asking me my opinion about the roast, and here it goes. All right, everybody has their opinions. There's so many things going on, how people feel. I hope I balanced this out right. As a comedian myself, as a guy who loves the edge, who loves pushing the envelope on racial, political, just all kinds of things, all right? Listen, a roast is a roast. A roast has been around for a long time. Roasting started in the Friars Club back in the day. I mean, black people, we called it the dozens. When you roast them up, the dozens, you talk about them up. That's what you do. And a roast, the first televised roast was in 1974, Dean Martin roast. Go watch them for some historical context. And roasting was people you knew that I think you knew or had relationships with, and it was like sort of a family thing where you get to go in on my private lives. You go in, all right? I don't know all the rules to roasting. I was at the Flavor Flav roast. I remember I was at Flavor Flav roast, and Cat Williams was hosting, and they brought in Flavor Flav on a harness, right? and Cat Williams said, I don't think, if you all remember the flying monkeys from Wizard of Oz, you just saw one. That's what his first joke was. And then Cat Williams goes, it's a roast, mother. It's a roast. It was, roasting is what it's called. Roasting. You're burning, mother. You're going in on people. See, I don't know the rules. I don't know. I think that everybody approved of this stuff because you have writers. You have writers. Every person has a right. Even Tiana Taylor was there, right? Tiana Taylor, The Rock, different people. Everybody has writers. And the writers write for the specific people, okay? A lot of the writers were white, which I thought was imbalanced. It was imbalanced. There should have been more black writers, okay? I think there should have been more black people roasting Kevin Hart, I think. And maybe that, this harmful shit wouldn't have really happened. It would have been sort of like, you know what I mean? It would have been a troubleshooter. But remember this, like I said, it's a roast. But also, who did you choose for the roast? I think it's your choices. You brought in Tony Hinchcliffe. Who the is surprised at what he said. You can't be surprised. This is what he does. He called Puerto Rico a floating island of trash. This is what Tony Hinchcliffe does. That is his brand. He did not go outside of his brand. You know, Shane Gillis. Shane is not as up as Tony Hinchcliffe, but Shane is gonna go in too. And it's a roast. That's very specific. It's not like, oh, let me just do my comedy special and talk. No, it's a roast. So a roast is like, we're going in on your, whether we don't give a, them going in on Cheryl Underwood's husband's death. I don't know. Did Cheryl approve of that? We have to ask Cheryl. I don't know. Going at the George Floyd thing, I thought that was unnecessary. It was unnecessary, but then again, it's a roast. But I thought it was unnecessary, especially with this climate, especially with police brutality, which is rampant still. The hanging thing, because they're still hanging black people, young black people, with the Black American history and the oppression and what they're doing to black voters, the firing of black women, the getting rid of DEI and affirmative action, all this shit that is coming down on black people with this administration. And I just think timing wise, it was like, yo, what the, hey, but again, it's a roast.
So what I was going to say before I press play on the Godfrey clip is I think that Godfrey and another comedian, Andrew Schultz, who is himself often referred to as an alt-right apologist, which is not at all what he is, just because he interviewed Donald Trump in the run-up to the election, the most recent one. He's not at all that, and I think that's a really unfair characterization. But I think Godfrey and Andrew Schultz talked about this a lot, about this idea that in comedy, this is a forum that is set up to be as extreme as possible. And I'm adding this now myself, but it's like this is the comedian's version of drag races or something. Like who can go rev the engine the hottest and just speed, past people the line of good taste. And as you'll hear Andrew Schultz explain, a lot of it is about, can you go to a subject that is uncomfortable and make somebody who feels uncomfortable about what you're saying laugh anyway, and that's the art. But I wonder what the motivation. I've three bigger questions about this. The free speech issue to me doesn't really apply here because these people are all contracted and paid to do this. There are writers. This is a corporate event. This is a corporate presentation. It's really contrived, actually. It's not even like it spontaneously happened at a comedy club, and then the public is like, "Oh my God, you can't say that." This is like orchestrated to push buttons. But the first question I had is, what personality type does it take to be Tony Hinchcliffe in that room and say the thing that just has everybody like, whoa, and then smirk and smile about it? And I don't know how he felt internally, but I feel like anybody who isn't either a psychopath or doesn't have some way of turning that off, you'd feel adrenaline. You'd feel like, wow, this is not my crowd. Because again, if you're in a club and you're doing a comedy set, even if you're roasting the crowd, everybody in the room feels united. They're pretty much with you if you're doing the job right, if the performance is hitting with them. And I just wonder about that, about, saying these uncomfortable things. I mean, Shane Gillis, he blushed at times, right? He was like, they told me to be racist, kind of a thing. It wasn't like I can just say whatever and I don't give a fuck what you feel or think. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, what is the motivation behind serving this to the public, particularly in such a divisive time? You could say Netflix is like, oh, well, they just want everybody to kind of laugh, but they didn't approach it that way. There were jokes inserted, which appear, I don't know if they were inserted this way on purpose, but they appear to clearly have had the effect of being more divisive politically in ways that have nothing to do with Kevin Hart. They were just like people like went out of their way, swerved 3 lanes over to bring these people up on purpose. Those people being George Floyd and Charlie Kirk. These people who have become martyrs to a cause, to the people who support them. And you know the public is going to be tweaked and sensitive, the various supporters of each. By the way, I do wonder if there are any people out there who have political sympathies with both George Floyd and Charlie Kirk. Believe it or not, that is possible. I bet you I could find somebody who feels that way. But you know these are hot button figures. These are like third rails that get that have, in the wake of both of their deaths, galvanized millions of people in their support. So why are you as Netflix toying with that? That makes me uncomfortable. Whether it's irresponsible or intentional, I don't care which one. I've often said ineptitude is just as bad as malice, as far as I'm concerned. I do not care. I mean, yes, we all make mistakes, but like you cannot just toy with that, whether through recklessness or intentional aggravation of it. That's the second question. I actually have more than 3 questions. The third thing is, what is the audience supposed to get out of this other than just watching people be vicious to each other in a way that you wouldn't even get that level at a comedy club, and you certainly wouldn't do that with people you know. You might rag really hard on your friends. I mean, like Godfrey said, you know, a bunch of dudes hanging out, they're going to really take it to each other. But you know there's certain things you don't touch. I think in the Godfrey clip, he goes on to say, you know, if somebody said my mother was dead, actually, it might have been somebody else, but you could make fun of your friends, but if somebody said, it was actually Charlemagne the God, who I might play this clip in a second. He said, but if somebody said, yo, you be talking about each other's moms and stuff, but if somebody said, my mother's dead, you would immediately go, you slam the brakes and you go, oh shit, sorry, my bad. Because me and my friends grew up saying merciless shit about each other's moms. In fact, I had a friend in my neighborhood, this guy named Joe, who whenever we'd get into, joking up, snapping at each other's moms, like I said, that shit got nasty. Right, you could not have a thin skin and go, "Oh, that's going too far." No, there was no bridge too far. Like what Godfrey's talking about is totally correct, or lines up with with what I saw growing up. But so Joe would, whenever there was somebody new who got into like the whole mom thing, he would walk up to him real angry, like real serious. Like all of a sudden the air got sucked out of the room, even though we were usually outside. He goes, yo, why you make fun of my mother? The bitch is dead. And the other person would have no idea how to respond because he was like really serious, and he would like get right in their face and just stare him down. Like he was about to fucking throw hands. Yo, why you make fun of my mother? The bitch is dead. And then the person would be like, oh shit, I didn't know. And then he'd be like, nah, I'm just joking. So he'd be like, gotcha, kind of, he'd have the person thinking for a second, oh shit, like this guy's mother is really dead and he's mad now. And I might have to fight my way out of this. He'd be like, nah, I'm just joking. And he'd smile, and that was his shtick. And it worked. But what is the audience supposed to get here? What is the benefit to the audience of watching people just completely take the restraints off and be as unbridled in their cruelty as possible? Is it that we are supposed to go, oh, wow, well, I don't get to do that very often, so this is a release for me? Or is it kind of like the audience is supposed to view it experience it kind of like being on at a fun house or a roller coaster or a horror movie where you're being pushed past your comfort zone, but you're kind of enjoying it. You're like, oh my God, I can't believe they said that. And it's thrilling. There's like an adrenaline rush. I mean, that seems obvious, right? Yeah, sure. That's the appeal. But I guess what I'm saying is it good for us, for Netflix to be serving this up? And the final thing, which is the most important question I have, is what's in it for Kevin Hart? Isn't he more wealthy than God at this point? I imagine if you're a comedian and you get approached to do one of these, okay, yeah, the money's good. And you don't want to be seen, I would think, as a spoil sport. Like, you want to be seen as a good sport. It's like, yeah, I can take it. I dish it out. I'll take it too. You want to be seen as somebody who can endure this ritual of your peers taking it to you and that you can take it. I can totally see if that would be the motivation, especially of a comic. But I mean, does he need the money? Like, at what price is it worth it, especially when you already have money and lots of it, you would think? At what price is it worth it to sell yourself so that millions of people are infuriated with you and feel betrayed because you're a Black comedian and they're Black, and they feel personally betrayed as if you supported a George Floyd joke, a tasteless, non sequitur, completely, out, like there was no context for it joke, and you were at George Floyd's funeral. That's where this gets into like, well, wait a minute, Kevin Hart isn't the only person being impacted by these jokes. People who still deeply feel personally, they feel a sense of like personal grief over George Floyd. They are caught in the shrapnel, in the crossfire of these jokes. People who feel deeply personally invested, they are personally grieving Charlie Kirk. They're caught in the shrapnel. They are the butt of these jokes as well. And my thing is like, well, why do them? And if you're Kevin Hart, what's in it for you besides more money? And besides being a sport? And I guess maybe, I don't know. I mean, I would have to ask comedians. Getting some sort of admiration for being able to go through this trial by fire at the hands of your peers, and it's almost like an initiation of some sort. You could say it's a humiliation ritual, literally a humiliation ritual, but I would think there's a feeling of, yeah, I stood there and took that. I showed that I have the stomach for it. I signed up for it. But I mean, I don't know that you want to be seen as the person who's like, no, take that out. But you could say, look, I don't want to get George Floyd's supporters upset unnecessarily. This doesn't really have anything to do with what we're doing here. And I don't want to get Charlie Kirk's supporters upset either. You could do that if you wanted to. You could draw the line there. And then if a comedian wanted to go right to the edge of that line and flirt with that line, but do it in a clever way that had everybody laughing, I would feel that is unifying. But that's not even the biggest thing that I want to respond to. For me, the real issue here, the real residual lingering question I have is regarding what Joe Budden said, where when you're honoring Black excellence, these types of, this element, this sort of casually racist or at least joking in a way that is unrestrained by any sense of propriety and doesn't care about offending, doesn't care about appearing racist. That element, the white comedians who are going to make racist jokes, basically is what I'm trying to say. They shouldn't be included in that kind of thing. And the fact that They shouldn't be included in an event that recognizes Black excellence. And the fact that Kevin Hart didn't express any opposition, Joe Budden took that personally, as did many, many people commenting on this on the roast after it happened. And to me, that signals like, well, listen, we as Black people, and Joe Budden is an extremely successful Black media figure. He's not necessarily on Kevin Hart's. I mean, I don't know if he would put himself on Kevin Hart's level, but he's not that far from it, from where I'm standing. I mean, he had a mega million Spotify deal. His podcast is popping. Now that he's got Mark Lamont Hill, who's the guy sitting in the background. Now there's some real dynamic in that room, and his whole crew, like Joe Budden's supporting cast. But with Mark Lamont Hill there, it's like it adds this whole other element of intellectual and emotional rigor. Like Budden is not just the ringleader. Now he's got somebody who can dribble the ball and really hold his own and take possession of the ball. He can grab the mic, and he is a podcast leader in his own right. They both took this personally. They both have a stake in Kevin Hart's success. They feel a stake. Like, hey, this means something to me, to all of us, that you have achieved this success. Why would you let it be bespoiled and desecrated for all of us? Now you've given us something painful you've given us a bitter pill to swallow, where we should have been able to just celebrate your success. If your boys from Philly who you grew up with, one of Kevin Hart's like oldest friends is a Black comedian who, I don't even know if he's a comedian, but he said that Kevin Hart was married to a Filipino ladyboy. Like he went there. But again, that's not something that comes at the expense of Hart's Black audience, or the people who may not even rock with his comedy or his acting, but they just feel like, well, he's one of us and he achieved, so let us have that. And, I'm not here to criticize that sense of ownership. I don't think it's necessarily the healthiest way to go, because then you're going to be aggrieved a lot of the time by people who are not actually connected with you at all. Even a media figure, celebrity on Joe Budden's level, he's not friends with Kevin Hart. He has no, Kevin Hart's decisions. If you stake your decisions on what someone else is doing who has not, even if they're your spouse or your kid, you have to learn to detach and say, well, what's yours is yours and what's mine is mine, and I can only carry what's mine. And what we project onto famous people who become proxies for our own hopes and dreams, or in this case, corrections for injustices and everything Godfrey was talking about. And you can quibble over the DEI thing, but I mean, the overall point is there's a population, there's a segment of the American population, African Americans, Black Americans, who are the product of immeasurable amounts of accumulated cruelty. And so when somebody succeeds as an entertainer, as an athlete, as a musician, I can understand why there's that sense of like, man, why did you let them tell this joke here? I get it. I'm not faulting Joe Budden or saying he's being too sensitive. I mean, I think, Joe Budden is in the hip hop world. He was a rapper himself. That does seem a little rich to me, coming from a rapper and someone who's in that world. I mean, he doesn't seem to necessarily take issue as much, but to his credit, he has brought up things that he thinks are destructive to the culture, as they call it in hip hop. And so he at least does get heated in terms of what he thinks is positive and what isn't. He is consistent along those lines. He doesn't like make a complete exception for rappers. And like I said, I understand it. But my bigger question is this. And, you know, as Black Americans, particularly people in Joe Budden's position who are successful, they are participating in pop culture and in culture and in disseminating their voice to millions of followers. But even just to the average person, my question is this. If you continue to be, I'll back up. My question is, while I understand that certain things that come at the expense or appear to come at the expense of Black entertainers might be painful for you, it might feel that way, you might experience it that way. What is your sense of continuing down the track of, well, this is a Black event, this is for us only? Again, I understand where this comes from. There's an apprehension about white business people controlling the entertainment industry and stealing ideas or becoming more successful. You know, this happened in music with rock music, you know, white musicians becoming more successful than Black musicians. There's a lingering sense of suspicion and wariness there. So it's like, hey, this is ours. And there's got to be a sense of ambivalence for, well, you know, if you're a Black American, you grow up in a society that cannot get enough Black music, that cannot get enough Black entertainment, cannot get enough the Black presence in athletics and sports, cannot get enough Black fashion, cannot get enough Black slang. Like if you go to any, you know, suburban white school district, kids are going to be saying things using slang that started with Black kids. Invariably, you will find this anywhere in America. America cannot get enough Black culture. And which is why I argue Black culture is American culture. And so the reason I bring that up is, if you take a step backwards and you say, wait a minute, which is the more empowered way to view these kinds of things? The Kevin Hart event, for example, which is the more empowered way to view Kevin Hart's career? Is recognizing Kevin Hart a quote unquote Black event? One of Joe Budden's own co-hosts, one of his crew there, asked him, you know, I didn't look at it as a Black event. Why is it a Black event? Although I think he meant that in a different sense than I did. Kevin Hart's voice is in children's films. Kevin Hart is a household name. Any person in the Midwest, any probably old lady you talk to in America, regardless of race, they recognize Kevin Hart. So has Kevin Hart's success transcended being the property of Black Americans? Is he more than just a Black entertainer? Is he just a superstar American entertainer who is Black? And the reason why I ask this is this: for the benefit of the people who feel invested in the success of other Black entertainers and Black figures generally. Because, you know, why are we only focused on entertainment? That's a good question, but that's a story for another day. Can you flip the script and look at it as if you own pop culture? You own American culture. If you're Black, you have a claim to the whole thing, the whole show. You're operating, the people who feel this way, who feel the same way as Joe Budden, they're operating under the lingering sense that there are aspects, that there are areas under the tent that they do not have access to, that are restricted, that they don't have the VIP pass to get into those areas under the tent. But when someone like Kevin Hart succeeds, if you're going to treat him as if he's like a corporation, that he is like sort of publicly owned by all other Black Americans, he's like a publicly traded corporation. You're shareholders in his success. If you're going to treat him like that, could you look at it the other way, where you don't need to be concerned about what white audiences think or say, or how they might try to demean him or demean Black people using him as the platform to do that, because he's already gotten to the highest level you can get? Can you look at it as if you own that too, and feel, just sit back in the knowing, the assurance that that is yours, that all of American culture is yours? Can you view it that way and thus not have the need to be so protective that actually white 4-year-olds in the supermarket knowing who Kevin Hart is a sign of your success as well? Can you view that as, oh, he has America in the palm of his hand. He has the world in the palm of his hand. And there's nothing you can do to take that away. I mean, I guess you could make allegations. You could, sure, he could be canceled, I guess, or some horrible thing could be either, he could be framed as having done some horrible thing, or it could be revealed. We don't know. But like, just let's presume there's nothing, no dark skeleton, nothing, buried in the backyard, proverbially, with Kevin Hart. Can you view this as, this is now the pathway? There are no restrictions. There's nothing to protect with somebody who's already gotten through that door and who has the VIP pass, no matter what Tony Hinchcliffe says or anybody else, to make fun of him. Because being hypervigilant will never help you feel empowered. I'm talking about anybody. Being constantly wary and defensive will never work for you to feel the peace and the sense of ease and the sense of respect. It does not engender respect because people don't see you. And again, I'm talking to anybody. I have this issue that I have to work through as well in certain situations where I'm vying for recognition, and it emanates from my attitude, from my vibration, and it leads to the opposite. Can Black Americans look at Kevin Hart's success and say, we already have, maybe not, in terms of collectively, we don't have economic access, we don't have the same opportunities, we don't have education. I get all that. We don't have protection under the law. There's widespread social bias. I understand all that. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying strictly in this context, there is nothing for you to justify, defend, or explain for you to look at Kevin Hart as only yours, because Kevin Hart belonging to everyone belongs more in turn to you if you're a Black American. Kevin Hart's net casting all of American pop culture and fitting it in his net, in turn, means you own that too. Can you look at it that way and realize, and when you do look at it that way, what do you think will shift in your outlook? How much do you think these kinds of things will bother you? When you take it for granted, oh yeah, that's ours to do. We can have a black comedian at Kevin Hart's level. There's nothing to defend there. He already did it. He already conquered Mount Everest with his career. So those are my thoughts on the aftermath of the Kevin Hart roast, which, like a lot of people, I'm kind of like, ooh, I don't want to see that. Ooh, that looks really uncomfortable. Ooh, I'm like, I really don't want to watch that, but then I'm curious, and then I end up watching it. And like a horror movie, either you regret it or you don't, or you go, oh wow, that was really thrilling. I guess we're all after that kind of thrill in spite of it all. And I guess that's what makes us human. But those are my thoughts. I'm curious to hear from you. Please do weigh in the comments. I urge you to hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons, but definitely weigh in the comments. I want to hear it all. Again, this is a monologue, but it's intended to be a dialogue. I want to start an exchange with you. I would also urge you to check out other videos on the channel, to subscribe to my Substack, to support the channel by either buying me a coffee or sending me a donation via Cash App. It's $feedback def. The links are in the description. For Feedback Def, I am Sabby Reyes Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist. Thanks for hanging with me. Over and out.